Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we're looking at what happens when a government doesn't collapse from an external attack or a coup, but when it hollows out from the inside. Imagine the intricate machinery of a state grinding to a halt, not because of a foreign power, but because its own workers, the cogs in the machine, are walking out the door en masse. This isn't just a human resources problem. It's a symptom of a nation in crisis, a powerful signal that something is fundamentally broken. When public servants, from high-level ministers to the essential rank and file, decide to leave, the consequences ripple through every layer of society. So what pushes a government's own workforce to the breaking point? Mass resignations are rarely a sudden explosion. They are the climax of escalating turmoil. One of the biggest drivers is profound political instability. When a government is seen as corrupt, illegitimate, or is leading the country down a path its own employees find unacceptable, the pressure to abandon ship becomes overwhelming. We saw a dramatic example of this in the United Kingdom in July 2022. Boris Johnson's premiership was plagued by a series of scandals, but the final straw was the Chris Pincher affair. This triggered a historic wave of resignations, with over 50 ministers and aides stepping down in just a couple of days. They weren't just quitting their jobs. They were making a public statement about the loss of standards and integrity at the heart of government. Their collective departure made the Prime Minister's position untenable and forced his own resignation. Another major catalyst is when an administration turns on its own people, creating a hostile work environment. During the Trump administration in the United States, tens of thousands of federal workers chose to leave their careers rather than endure the daily stress of a toxic atmosphere and the constant threat of being fired. This was made worse by policies aimed at drastically slashing the size of government, which included buyout offers and threats of mass layoffs. While many of these departures were officially labeled voluntary resignations, for the people involved, it felt like they were being systematically pushed out. It was a form of constructive dismissal on a massive scale. And of course, economic factors play a huge role. In many countries, public sector jobs come with inadequate pay, poor working conditions, and limited opportunities for advancement. This makes the private sector look incredibly tempting. The result is a phenomenon known as brain drain, or human capital flight. This is a constant battle for many developing nations, where highly skilled professionals like doctors, engineers, and scientists leave for better prospects abroad. Their home countries, which often invested heavily in their education, lose that invaluable expertise. We even saw this in the developed world during the Great Resignation that followed the COVID-19 pandemic. State and local governments in the U.S. saw a huge surge in departures as employees sought better pay and more flexible work arrangements elsewhere. So when this mass exodus begins, what happens next? The consequences are like a domino effect, knocking over one crucial part of society after another. The most immediate and visible impact is the disruption of public services. When a significant number of employees leave, they take with them vital skills and years of institutional knowledge that are incredibly difficult to replace. This can lead to a serious decline in the quality of essential services we all rely on, like healthcare, education, and public safety. For instance, a mass exodus of medical professionals from a developing nation can cripple its healthcare system, leaving the population dangerously vulnerable. In the United States, the departure of experienced federal workers has sparked serious concerns about the ability of key agencies, like the Federal Aviation Administration, to carry out their critical safety responsibilities. The economic fallout can be just as severe. A shrinking government workforce means a loss of tax revenue. This, in turn, can force cuts to social programs and major infrastructure projects, stunting a country's economic growth. The mass departure of skilled workers also reduces consumer spending, which hurts local businesses and can lead to further job losses in the private sector. Furthermore, the political gridlock that often accompanies these crises can lead to prolonged government shutdowns, which slow economic growth even more and can seriously disrupt financial markets. Beyond the tangible impacts on services and the economy, there's a profound psychological toll on the nation. For the employees who leave, the decision is often agonizing and stressful, filled with uncertainty about their future. Many who left the Trump administration described going through a grieving process, feeling as though they were forced out of careers they genuinely loved. And what about those who stay behind? They often face crushing workloads, plummeting morale, and a constant sense of job insecurity. This leads to widespread burnout and a sharp decline in productivity, further weakening the government's ability to function. But perhaps the most insidious consequence of all is the erosion of public trust. When a government is visibly in a state of chaos and collapse, citizens' faith in its ability to govern effectively plummets. The scandals and political infighting that precede mass resignations create a powerful narrative of a dysfunctional, untrustworthy system. This decline in trust has long-term implications, making it incredibly difficult for future governments to implement policies or rally public support for important initiatives. A classic example of this is the Watergate scandal in the 1970s, which led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. That event caused a significant and lasting decline in public trust in the U.S. government, a wound that, some argue, has never fully healed. History and recent events offer some stark illustrations of this phenomenon in action. Take the collapse of the French government in September 2025. After his minority government's budget was rejected, Prime Minister François Bayrou was ousted, triggering a fresh wave of political chaos. It left the country in a state of legislative deadlock, following a series of unstable, short-lived governments that had already highlighted the deep political divisions tearing the country apart. In Nepal, in that same month, nationwide protests, led primarily by young people, reached a boiling point, culminating in the resignation of the Prime Minister and the collapse of the government. The chaos that ensued was staggering. The main international airport was blocked, and thousands of inmates escaped from prisons, forcing the government to impose curfews in major cities. The estimated cost of simply restoring core government functions was a jaw-dropping half of the country's entire GDP. And returning to the United States, the early part of 2025 saw the largest single-year decline in civilian federal employment since the end of World War II. This exodus, driven by a hostile environment and threats of firings, had a massive impact on the functioning of countless government agencies and created a pervasive climate of fear and uncertainty for the public servants who remained. So how does a country begin to rebuild from the rubble of a government exodus? The path to recovery is long and arduous. The first, most critical step is to address the root causes. This isn't a time for band-aid solutions. It may require deep political reforms to restore stability and integrity, new economic measures to improve pay and working conditions, and a concerted, genuine effort to rebuild a positive and supportive work environment. Next, the depleted workforce must be rebuilt. This requires a strategic approach to both recruitment and retention. Governments may need to offer competitive salaries and benefits to attract and retain the top talent they so desperately need. Investing in training and development programs is also key, as it helps fill skills gaps and creates a more resilient and capable public sector for the future. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of the recovery process is restoring public trust. This is a task that takes time and consistent action. It requires an unwavering commitment to transparency, accountability, and good governance. The government must prove to its citizens, through its actions, that it is capable of acting in the public interest, and that the era of chaos and instability is truly over. In conclusion, the mass resignation of government employees is a powerful and often devastating event. It's much more than a staffing crisis. It's an unmistakable signal that the social contract between a state and its servants has been broken. The causes are complex, ranging from political upheaval and hostile leadership to simple economic hardship. The consequences are far-reaching, impacting everything from the delivery of public services and the stability of the economy to the psychological well-being of the entire nation. While the road to recovery is long and difficult, understanding the causes and effects of these governmental breakdowns is the first step toward building more resilient, more effective systems of governance that can withstand the storms of political and social change. Thanks for tuning in to Fun Facts Online.